welcome to another episode of Bridge the Channel. Basically, the beginning of a whole new season. We're coming to you as our first episode since the summer, and it's first to say that quite a few things have changed since the last time we met, particularly here in the UK. Last time we met, there was a different sovereign, a different queen in the UK, and a different prime minister. Now we have two new characters in both of those roles. And of course, we also have many new developments, both the relationship of the UK with the EU, the relationship of the UK with the US, the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. Definitely, it's a period of a big kind of upheaval in the transatlantic space and the way that relations between Europe, the UK, the US are shaping up ahead of a very, very difficult winter. As I am recording this, the British pound is apparently plummeting in response to some economic measures that the new government has taken of Liz Truss. We're going to discuss those later. It feels a bit like a return to the 70s, in case you haven't, guessed, with debt rising in the UK, the pound plummeting. There might be an economic crisis ahead of us. There's lots of things to discuss today. Let's have a bit of a revision of what we went through over the summer and where we are in the beginning of this, what many will expect might be a difficult winter, all through the perspective of our Bridge the Channel series, which is, again, the relationship between the UK, the EU, and the US, more global perspective of the transatlantic relationship in a very, very volatile environment. So let's start with the royal news of the day. By now, most of you have probably seen everything that went down with the Queen's funeral, all the pageantry, all the official ceremonies. Of course, it was very emotive and very powerful, especially if you live in the UK. This is definitely a moment, a very important moment of passage, I would say, for the entire country. And of course, there's big questions about the role of the new king and how he will faced with various challenges that his own dynasty faces, the institution of the monarchy and the position of the monarchy in modern British society. There's also, what I would like to discuss a bit about more now, is also some kind of subtle political and even geopolitical dimensions that have to do with the way that the monarchy kind of plays out outside of the UK, particularly in relations with the Commonwealth. And I would say that the monarchy, and especially Queen Elizabeth, was an important thread that kept loads of actors and loads of factors of the global Western alliance together. She was very popular, of course. She was a major element of soft power that allowed the UK, the US, and important powers of the English-speaking world, like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, find common ground. Now what you have instead, with her passing, there's an increasing debate in a lot of those countries about whether, for example, they should still have the British monarch as their head of state. There's a big debate going on about the relationship of the monarchy, the legacy of the monarchy, with questions of decolonization and race relations. It's a very, very important debate that goes on in the Caribbean, of course, but also inside domestic politics of places like Australia and Canada. So I would argue that this passing to a new monarch also brings in an important new debate about how the West holds itself together and how the West understands itself, particularly towards non-Western actors, non-Western cultures. I think it's an important debate, and while of course it's still very symbolical and pertains primarily to the English-speaking world, I think it will be important to keep track of this debate about the role of the British monarchy, particularly in countries of the Commonwealth, because it will track a lot about the self-perception of the West in global politics. Now, leaving the geopolitics of the British monarchy on one side, let's move to some more mundane issues, which have to do with the new British government that has been installed, the government of Liz Truss. And it's fair to say that she wasn't really handed the best deck of cards, having to deal with the passing of the Queen on the first week that she took over. It's fair to say that it has been a pretty crazy time in British politics. We're going to talk today about two elements of the new government. First, we're going to start with the economics and why I think that it is important to keep an eye out how the UK deals with the ongoing energy and economic crisis that the whole of the Western world is currently facing. And we see from the new government of Liz Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Minister of Finance, as we call them in Europe, quasi-core is this new model of dealing with an economic crisis. And they're doing things quite differently to what goes on in the rest of the EU on the one hand, and in the US on the other hand, which is that they're investing significantly on supply-side economics, essentially tax cuts, for the UK to grow out of this crisis. Many people accuse Liz Truss of basically rehashing Thatcherism, that is basically bringing in failed recipes from the past, but she presents it as a very bold experiment. Essentially, the idea is that you can only grow out of a crisis by actually growing, therefore by cutting taxes. Of course, she has frozen essentially energy prices, but beyond that, she says that she doesn't want to be giving people money directly from the government. She actually wants to lower taxes and allow people to invest money or spend money into the economy for the economy to grow. Experts are actually quite divided on this. A lot of people worry that this will actually increase in debt, and at a time of rising interest rates, I don't have to see how it plays out, but it's fair to say that right now, just like in the 1980s actually, the UK is carving out its own distinct model of actually managing public finances at a time of crisis. Essentially, the UK again is positioning itself as a distinct model vis-a-vis Europe. Although actually we'll have the best model to go through a crisis, we'll actually have to go through winter and see how that plays out. But it's fair to say that Liz Truss is now presenting a very, very distinct model of economics and public finances at a time of really, really important economic situations, both for the UK and Europe and the US. So that was the economics of the Liz Truss government. What about her foreign policy? It's fair to say that in foreign policy, she has quite big shoes to fill, because foreign policy was basically the one thing that the Boris Johnson government got right, particularly in positioning the UK as the leading force, the leading voice in the Western response against Russian aggression in Ukraine. Now, Liz Truss has quite strong Western credentials herself. She has also been very, very vocal about supporting Ukraine and opposing Russia. And she has also been very, very vocal from quite early on about standing up to Chinese presence and influence in the world. In that sense, we should expect much of rupture, much of change from the Boris Johnson foreign policy. The problem with Liz Truss is that a lot of her pro-Western credentials clash with complicated relations she has with the both major Western partners of the UK, the EU on the one hand and the US on the other hand. Liz Truss has invested a lot of political capital domestically on having a very, very tough stance on Brexit, particularly the problem of Northern Ireland. And of course, on the other hand, Joe Biden and the US is quite committed to actually seeing the peace process in Northern Ireland being maintained and not allowing Brexit to disrupt it. So essentially, Liz Truss has a foreign policy that says of the right things towards the West's enemies, but she has also positioned herself domestically in a way that will make it very difficult for the UK to have smooth relations with both of its main Western partners. There's a big concern here in London that while she is very, very strong when it comes to Russia and China, she may also find herself being dragged by domestic political developments in actually isolating the UK both from the EU and the US. So Boris Johnson was someone who was able to navigate this contradiction thanks to his personal style and flair, but Liz Truss is not really that kind of politician. So we're going to have to see also how her foreign policy plays out. In a way, it's a pretty idiosyncratic style of foreign policy that she will pursue, quite like her economics. Now, whether this will mean that the UK will be amoral for the rest of the West or will find itself isolated within the West is something we'll have to wait and see. So this was another episode of Bridge the Channel, our first episode in a new season. It's a bit long, but we've got a lot of things to catch up on. Lots of interesting things happening, cutting across EU, UK, US, transatlantic relations, the war in Ukraine, of course. As you can see also around me, clouds are gathering, winds are gathering. It's going to be a pretty challenging winter. But once again, the UK is at the forefront of a lot of those developments, both in terms of trying out new ideas, both in terms of facing up to pressures that the rest of Europe will also have to face up to. We're going to have lots of things to discuss moving forward to this season. The energy crisis, where the war in Ukraine goes, transatlantic relations. We also have the elections coming up in the US as well, of course. New government in the UK, new sovereign, new king. That's also quite important. Bridget Channel and the Martin Center is going to be here to cover those things as always. Until next time, take care.